In 1973, Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan created the character of Blade and was introduced in Marvel Comics' The Tomb of Dracula number 10 as a supporting character. He was featured heavily in the series for about a year until he eventually found his way into other comic book series like Adventure into Fear, Vampire Tales, and Marvel Preview. He somewhat disappeared from comics from the mid 1970s to the early 1990s, where he was featured prominently once more. He appeared in a lot of different titles like Ghost Rider, Midnight Suns Unlimited, Morbius, Night Stalkers, and plenty of others. He eventually got his own series in 1994 entitled Blade the Vampire Hunter, and a bunch of follow ups to that. Eventually, talks of a film were brought up. Marvel Studios actually wanted to do a version as early as 1992 with LL Cool J in the role. It was eventually set up at New Line Cinemas, ironically now owned by Warner Brothers, with David S. Goyer writing the script. Originally, they wanted to do something very comical that would border on a spoof. However, Goyer talked them out of it and do something much, much darker. At around the same time, Wesley Snipes tried to get a Black Panther movie off the ground, but that was ultimately cancelled until the very different version that was part of the MCU that was released in 2018. When he heard that Blade was casting, he immediately campaigned for the role, and Goyer always thought he was perfect, so he was eventually cast. Denzel Washington and Lawrence Fishburne were considered. Despite numerous production problems and various delays, Blade was released in 1998 and introduced a much darker but serious tone for comic book films, as well as starting the modern era of comic book movies, as movies like X-Men and Spider-Man were fast-tracked into production after the huge success of Blade. Eventually, a sequel was commissioned, and after the original director, Stephen Norrington, declined to do the film, Guillermo del Toro signed on to direct instead. Blade 2 was eventually released in 2002. Well, this is a bit of a weirder one to do since Blade is more of an action franchise rather than a horror franchise. The main villains are steeped in the Gothic horror lore, so I decided to count it. Anywho, the first Blade was a good movie. However, it's horrifically dated. It's drenched in 90s tone and culture, and it is incredibly distracting. However, it has some good development, a good story, great action, and a killer third act. The first two-thirds or so are hit and miss, with either being really interesting or really dragging, but it's still an awesome movie. Much like with most people, I do think that the sequel is better. While the story and character development take a back seat, the action is top-notch, the characters are pretty memorable, and the film looks really cool. It's very dark and gothic, like many of Guillermo del Toro's films, and because of this, it's a bit more timeless, I guess. Okay, maybe not timeless, but it certainly isn't unbearably dated as the first one, or from what I've seen of the third one, although that one looks more so like a generic dark and edgy 2000s film. Wesley Snipes is still absolutely fucking awesome as Blade. He's cool, charismatic, and kicks all types of ass. Mahershala Ali certainly has big shoes to fill, even though the movie will probably be shit due to the obligatory PG-13 rating, but whatever. Outside of that, I found Damaskinos to be a really interesting character. He has that Nosferatu look to him that I can't help but love. Speaking of, though, the makeup is fucking awesome. The Reapers look so fucking cool in this movie, and in my mind, pretty much what the monsters in I Am Legend should have looked like rather than the CGI Voldemorts we got in the final product, but that's neither here nor there. As I said, the story is rather fast and loose and not really at the forefront. It's kinda just the thing that gets the characters from one action scene to the next. The only major bit of development that was in the movie was the romantic subplot between Blade and Nyssa, which I found to be majorly shoehorned in and poorly written. It just felt unnecessary and kinda dumb. I like the Blood Pack, though. Very colorful group of characters, including Donnie Yen, Tony Curran from Doctor Who fame, and the always amazing Ron Perlman as Reinhardt. Despite being an idiot in real life, Perlman will always kick all types of ass on screen, no matter who he is, even as the Beast. The action is good for the most part, but I noticed that some of it was pretty jump cutty and not as flowing as it should have been. But I still go back to my earlier statement with that it's still top notch. Blade 2 isn't amazing by any means. It's an enjoyable action flick with some dark gothic elements with a cool villain. It's nothing amazing, but I enjoyed it for what it is.